Hi everyone, it's been a while, but we're back with a brand new minisode on a subjective topic that everyone has an opinion about right now, the new Disney Plus shows from Marvel Studios. Specifically, we wanted to examine the differences between those and the Marvel Netflix shows in terms of production, targeted audience, and storytelling.
If you have been following our podcast, you'll know that we touched on this subject in an early episode, especially why Daredevil is best suited for long-form storytelling, and you can find the episode link in this video's description. But now that 3 of the Marvel Disney Plus series, WandaVision, Falcon, and the Winter Soldier, and Loki are out, we wanted to come back to this with a more specific focus.
To clarify, this is not going to be a comprehensive review of these shows, though if you're interested in hearing more from us on that, we may record a longer episode for our Talk Daredevil podcast in the future. And more importantly, we're not trying to make this a competition. But now that we've seen some of these new MCU series, it feels like the right time to do an analysis of how Marvel Studios is producing their shows, how it differs from what Marvel TV did before them, and what we hope to see moving forward. Now we're going to start this discussion with the differences in the approach to production we're seeing between old Marvel TV, specifically Marvel Netflix, and the new MCU Disney Plus shows. Now the Netflix series followed what we call a more traditional streaming TV model, roughly 13 hours per season, give or take, and an estimated budget of around $4 million per episode, at least for its first seasons. Now, showrunner was in charge of developing and executing their vision each season, and different directors rotated through the season per episode. All things we're familiar with television. TV is a writer's medium, and storytelling is king, especially with serialized TV. Now, the Disney Plus MCU shows, on the other hand, utilize a different model. A mostly singular story with much shorter episode orders, similar to a limited series, but supported by a movie-sized budget. And where this process begins to sound familiar to Marvel's filmmaking operation is in the creative direction. A single director is tasked with helping to develop the look and feel of the show alongside what Marvel Studios is calling a head writer, which is replacing the showrunner altogether. In fact, Kevin Feige has raised his format as a selling point for Marvel's new shows for Disney+, basically calling them longer stories that happen to be in a TV format, but otherwise indistinguishable from their movies in budget and production quality. So in short, the Netflix shows followed a more familiar TV model focused on developing engaging stories that are crafted for longer, episodic television, while the Disney Plus shows focus on a movie-like model that focuses on developing a visually stunning series. Story-wise, feels like longer movies split into parts.
This is where the subjective part comes in. Whether you prefer flashier visuals over slow burn character stories or vice versa is a matter of taste. We can tell you what model to prefer. However, there's valid critique for both. Maintaining a movie-like production value means shorter seasons are necessary because the budget is prioritized for sets and effects. This can lead to the plot and pacing feeling uneven, rushed, or stretched. We saw this happen with all 3 shows in various different ways. With Wanda and Falcon, we saw a lot of small parts being introduced to fill the time where the plot was missing, and these smaller parts didn't always get a satisfactory conclusion, leading to the show feeling rushed towards the end. On the other hand, Loki decided to fill this plotless time by having a slower pace, more exposition, and more character interaction, which led to some episodes feeling like fillers or like they weren't moving the show forward at all. When we look at the Marvel Netflix shows, working on leaner budgets can mean sacrificing some of the production value for a longer story, which can lead to less action, cheaper effects, cheaper costumes, so on. We've seen this in some of the Marvel TV shows, which some people have criticized for the lack of costume time, effects, etc.
But following one model or the other doesn't mean you're guaranteed to end up with these problems. In fact, there are more amazing limited series on TV now than ever, with brilliant, focused, and character-driven stories being told in a small amount of episodes. Shows like Chernobyl showcase magnificent storytelling in just 5 episodes while maintaining high production values, just like the Disney Plus shows. We also have shows like Daredevil and The Boys, which are visually impressive while working within a more traditional TV production model. At the end of the day, what makes or breaks a story is not how long or how impressive it looks, but how well developed it is. Which brings us to our next topic.
As I said before, a common critique with WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier is how some of their plot lines felt rushed. This has led to some fans saying that the shows will have benefited from having more episodes. We understand this, but we don't necessarily agree. Don't get me wrong, I prefer long stories myself. But quantity doesn't necessarily mean quality. Sure, Wanda and Falcon could have benefited from more episodes, but they could have also wrapped the story properly with the current episode count if their focus hadn't been so scattered. I will even go as far as to argue that Falcon and Loki would have worked better as movies, if only because that would have forced them to have a more focused and evenly paced story. Now, let's go over some of the reasons why we think this scattered story approach is happening, starting with Marvel Studios' strategy to make sure that these new TV series are connected directly into the movies.
Based on Marvel Studios' previous announcements regarding Phase 4, as well as interviews with head creatives on WandaVision, Falcon, and Loki, it's clear there is a specific blueprint for the Disney Plus shows, with Feige having a direct hand in determining how any one project connects with another. This concept isn't new, it's what has fueled the MCU through 24 interconnected films. What is new is the idea of narratively connecting Marvel Studios' produced TV series directly into its overall slate of films. As fans of original Marvel TV know, there were attempts to cross over characters in early seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but ultimately due to logistics, since movie and production and TV production are on vastly different schedules, with the latter moving much more quickly, and probably some issues with rights, OG Marvel TV series like S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and the Defendersverse on Netflix needed to stand on its own or only tangentially reference what was happening in the movies. So now that we have Marvel Studios sanctioned connectivity playing out on our screens, are these shows actually better? Well, we're on the fence about that. Connectivity in the form of bringing in familiar characters and consistent settings and plot isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's great that these shows are allowed to springboard off stories that started in the movies and allow underrated characters to be further developed. That's always been the joy of being an original Marvel TV fan, and getting to deep dive with a character like Matt Murdock, because 40 plus hours of examining the ins and outs of his character and journey will always be more satisfying than a couple hours of combined screen time, if even that, in the movies.
But, as we mentioned earlier, the time for the Disney Plus shows is still very limited because of budget being prioritized elsewhere. Despite this, these shows are expected to not only tell their own story, but also fill the gaps between movies and set up the next MCU plotline. With so many things to address other than just telling a good story, it is really no surprise that these shows have felt stretched thin, rushed, or even underdeveloped. Even if the shows tried to do something interesting and different, it was clear as they entered their finales that the mandate was to go back to the Marvel status quo, which means making sure everything is neatly tied off and nothing is changed too drastically, at least not negatively, in order to ensure that these characters are ready for the next project. Now, we do want to mention that Loki is the first of the Marvel Studios TV shows to get a second season, which means that the reset wasn't as drastic as the first two shows. Still, it was clear the finale's primary emphasis was all about setting up the next MCU plotline and not about Loki itself. There's also the added complexity of switching between movie and TV audiences, because Marvel doesn't want to make the Disney Plus shows a must-watch for the casual moviegoer. The actual impact these shows can have on the wider MCU is limited. Be warned, spoilers ahead. Now is your time to turn around if you don't want to be spoiled on the Disney Plus shows. If you want to skip ahead, do so with the timestamps. The actual impact these shows can have on the wider MCU is limited. Anything relevant that is introduced in them will have to be easily reintroduced in the next movie. And as mentioned before, nothing can change too drastically from the beginning of the show. Which means Carly and her group are dead, having no lasting impact on the continuity. Simo is back in prison, Sang is Captain America, Wanda lost her husband, and her children will need to be reintroduced at some point in whatever movie. The TVA is no more, meaning we once again have branching multiverse as explained by Bruce and the Elder One during the Endgame. Kang is dead and ready to be reintroduced. In short, very little has changed from where Avengers Endgame left it, despite us having was the content equivalent of 6 movies.
There's a statement that's been paraphrased by a lot of different creators who've worked on live-action Marvel properties, about how Marvel allows them to take some toys down from the shelf to play with, but at the end of the day, they need to put it all back in their packaging and back on the shelf for the next person, movie, or show. It's not unlike characters in the comics who have had decades of runs, but can't change too much for when the next person takes over that book. It's something comic readers may be used to, but unfortunately in something like TV, it has the consequence of stripping the story of its tension and stakes.
This creates a dilemma that we don't think has been highlighted enough, which is whose vision matters most on these shows, the writers or the executives. This creative confusion feels like a consequence of Marvel Studios abandoning the traditional TV model in favor of transposing their film process onto their new TV shows. Without a showrunner directing the ship, and this is the person who also leads the writing room and the overall vision of the series, what is the creative engine driving these projects? How much interference is there at the executive and studio level? How much does corporate mandate dictate character motivation in storylines? If a Disney Plus TV show merely exists as an advertisement for the next box office smash, then is there any motivation to make a series that's more than just Easter eggs and eye candy for the fans?
Which does beg the question, in this new age of MCU TV on Disney Plus, should these series only be for hardcore fans? Now, Marvel Studios has a large, loyal, and captive audience, but the goal for any corporate conglomerate, and especially one like Disney, that is making a huge push on streaming, is to grow their numbers. We understand that things have worked out pretty darn well for Marvel Studios so far, but it would be unfortunate to ignore the diversity and range of what came from Marvel's previous television projects.
We have to wonder if this holistic approach will manage to capture that same diverse range of viewers, or if those who are looking for a more traditional TV approach will ultimately have to look outside of Marvel. The praise shows like The Boys and Invincible are getting certainly makes a case for it. However, as Marvel fans, we believe the Disney Plus shows have the potential to surpass themselves.
Kevin Feige has rightfully earned a lot of trust from fans in his handling of the first 3 phases of the MCU. And with Phase 4, we know there will be a distinct shift in strategy and focus away from those core Avengers of the first 10 years and looking ahead to a new configuration of characters to bring the MCU into its next 10. One that is hopefully more diverse and expansive and brings an even broader audience into the fold through its Disney Plus series. But neither TV nor films are the same as they were 10 years ago, and audiences have evolved too. Viewers can be both entertained and challenged by the media they consume. We can have high-budget, technically impressive visuals and complex storytelling. And at its heart, we know Marvel is a company that values stories and just wants to tell the best ones. So what we hope to see moving forward is an acknowledge of what is and isn't working in this initial stage of their foray into television, not necessarily to us, the public, but at least behind the scenes, and to see them actively making the adjustment necessary to turn a decent first push into a fully connected television universe into a truly great one. So there you have it. Those are our quick opinions on the first few shows. And keep in mind, we're not necessarily speaking for the campaign as a whole, we're just 2 fans working through our thoughts as we watch this new Marvel Studios TV experiment unfold. And keep an eye out, because we're probably going to come back together with more thoughts once Hawkeye has dropped. And hey, we know you all have some opinions too, and we love to hear them. Our comments are always open to your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this video, then as always, hit us with a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See you next time.
Bye!